Hello and welcome back to the CGSP Roundtable. I'm Eric Olander, and today we're only going to have two of us on the show, just Geraud and I. Geraud joining us, of course, from the beautiful island Mauritius, where he serves as the Africa editor for the China Global South Project. A very good afternoon to you, Geraud. Welcome to the Roundtable.
Good afternoon to Eric, and good afternoon to our guests who are following us. I don't know, from any parts of the world, morning,
All
evening.
over,
So, yeah.
all over. And we've started migrating the show now more and more to Fridays. We wanted to do it on Wednesdays, but Wednesdays are proving to be a little bit on the busy
Quite
side.
difficult, yes. Very
And
complex
so,
to,
but
to manage our
Fridays is
schedule.
a little bit more of a chill day for us. We don't do as much original writing on Fridays, so that's why it allows us a little bit more time to be able to kind of do the show like here. So, we've gotten some great feedback from everybody as well about the show. We're so glad that you guys are enjoying it. Also, just keep sharing your comments and like and subscribe if you want to follow this. We're going to be doing a lot more video. In fact, we're just about to launch a new video section on our website. Our subscribers are going to get exclusive video that's not available here on YouTube or other platforms. So if you want to get some of those insights and the daily newsletter, also our chat CGSP, which is our AI bot. We created this AI bot, Geraud, because we saw that the way that ChatGPT and Bard were talking about China was somewhat distorted. And as you found out in your own research, it just made up information, a lot of information.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly.
So
that's why we
in
made
fact,
that.
you even caught Bard lying.
Exactly.
That was the funny thing for me.
I caught Bart creating a fake news. I think I'm going to make a video on that one day, explaining
really
to
should.
people what I've done in South Africa, though. I really explained to people really how Bart was caught really making fake news, fake link, fake name of the article. It's a whole shebang. I think I'm going to make a video. I think I'm going to schedule maybe next week. I'm going to take a maybe 10-minute video to tell you the story behind that. I think I'm going to keep that for our subscribers. So
That's
if you want that,
thing.
you're going to have you subscribe and you're going to have to see what was the discovery I've made on that story.
Yeah, and also just very quickly before we get into our show today, just want to give everybody a heads up that Geraud and I, we are absolute geeks for battery metals, and there's not many people around the world who say that. It's a pretty lonely existence, but we are absolutely fascinated with everything that's going on in the battery metal mining, the refining, the EV space, all of that. So we're going to start a weekly 10-15-minute video update on everything going on in battery metals around the world. So Indonesia mining, DRC mining, Bolivia mining, all the latest
Chile,
EV trends,
Argentina,
Chile as well, the prices, all of that. And then we're talking about actually starting a new newsletter just focused on EV battery metals, because there's so much interest in this. And this is such a geopolitical hot potato and the information that's out there is just really not very good. And so we feel there's a big opening in the market for us to do something. So keep an eye out for that. Okay. Today, we've got 3 topics that we're going to talk about, and they're really interesting. And I'm really looking forward to getting Geraud's take on this. First, there was a monumental court case that came down in Ghana from the High Court in Accra, where a very notorious Chinese illegal miner known as the Galamsey Queen, Aisha Huang, she was sentenced to 4 years and 6 months in prison. We're going to talk about that. I want to get Geraud's take. Then we're going to look at 1 year now since the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit. It was taking place in Washington around this time last year. Lots of promises made. We're going to talk about whether the U.S. kept those promises, and again, in the context of the U.S. China competition for influence in Africa, it's very important. And finally, we're going to talk about a crappy Reuters story that came out this week, also about debt and China. And again, we're going to tell you why we didn't think it was a very good story, and also why there's some problems in how some African governments still misunderstand the situation regarding debt and China. Okay, let's get on to our first topic. This is the Galamsey Queen. So, Geraud, why don't you tell everybody, just because Galamsey is a West African word, just kind of set up Aisha Huang. Tell everybody about who she is, why she's important, and don't get into the details of the verdict yet, because I've got some sound bites that will do that for you.
So just to give you guys a bit of context, Aisha Huang, it's that Chinese lady who's been in Ghana for so many years. She was known as the Queen of Galamsey. The Galamsey are the name that coin in Ghana. That's how they call the artisanal miners who are mining gold in Ghana. So she was been in Ghana for so many years, and she was expelled in Ghana in 2018 because the government was doing a crackdown on all the Galamsey activities in the country. So after that, she was caught back in the country last year in 2022 with fake ID card, with illegal re-entry to Ghana. So that's how she was caught by the authorities, and she was facing justice since last year. Only the verdict came out like few days, not this week. So basically, this is the basic I can give you before going to the details on what's happened and what she's done and what's the aftermath of the story and what's implied. Yeah.
So so that's really important background. And for those of us who've been in the China-Africa reporting space now for a long time, Aisha Huang goes back to the 2014, 2015 period. We had heard about her for a long time. So it's been almost 10 years since this court case has been dragging on, well, not the court case, but just the drama about Aisha Huang. And as Geraud pointed out, she was arrested. She was then partially tried, but then deported, and now she was fully tried. And so it's not surprising that on Monday, when the news broke that Aisha Huang had been sentenced to jail, it became breaking news. Let's take a listen now.
Here on the Pulse this afternoon, Chinese national accused of grave mining offences has finally been placed behind bars for the next 4.5 years. N. Huang, or Aisha Huang, if you want to call her as such, has been standing trial for undertaking mining operations without license, facilitating the participation of some persons engaged in these illegal mining operations, and also the illegal employment of foreigners and entering Ghana while prohibited from re-entry. Well, today, a court actually decided to sentence Ms. Huang to jail for 4.5 years.
Okay, so 4.5 years was the sentence. She also got a $4,000 fine. Now, very important here, Geraud, and this is a really big part of the case right now. She was tried under the old mining law, where the maximum sentence was 5 years, and the new mining law that came into effect around 2018, 2019, made the minimum sentence 15 years, the maximum sentence 25 years. And so we did an interview with a Ghanaian environmental expert for our podcast this week, and he was really frustrated that the Attorney General did not use this opportunity with Aisha Huang to test out the new law. And so a lot of people felt like, you know what, she's going to get out in 4.5 years, and she's going to get to be able to go back to China and enjoy all of the wealth that she generated from mining illegally in Ghana, and not be able to pay the price. So now the Attorney General is going to file an appeal to the High Court to retry her under the new law. Now, the reason why they did that is because her crimes were committed in 2015 to 2017, again, before the new law took effect. And so it's very interesting. So after the news broke, Geraud, on Monday, the conversation shifted very quickly away from Aisha Huang, and now more to a comment that also came out of the justice who handed down the verdict. She noted in her sentencing that Aisha Huang is responsible and abused the hospitality of the Ghanaian people. That was one point. The second point that she made, which is really important, is that she put some accountability onto chiefs and landowners who allow their land to be exploited by illegal miners. This is where the conversation very quickly shifted to in the Ghanaian media. Let me play some sound now for you, Geraud, from one of the main national TV talk shows, the breakfast shows. And this is, again, a sample of what the conversation was like.
I'll commend the judge, and part of the ruling of what she said is that no foreigner can come to Ghana to come and do Galamsey without the collaboration of the Ghanaians.
Yeah.
And so she's of the view that whilst we are chasing the Galamseyers, the law should also go after the landowners and chiefs who give their lands to people to do illegal mining. And I think that some of us have said this thing so many times that, look, if the one who is giving the land will go scot-free, nothing will happen to the person, then the Galamsey fight will be difficult. But if it's part of the law that when somebody is undertaking illegal mining on your land, you, the landowner, you face prosecution.
With or without your consent.
With your, why can somebody do something on it without your consent?
But what if I'm not in the country?
If you're not in the country, you have to prove to us that you don't know anything about it. You understand it? I cannot have my land and somebody will just be doing Galamsey on it, then I sit aloof. If it's not with my express permission, how can somebody just walk into my land? The land has been there for generations. Nobody can walk onto, because everybody knows that this land belongs to this family or this man or that. So I think that the recommendations of the judge that the law should go after the owners of the land, I think that it is one very important thing that if we want to win the fight against Galamsey, we must include in the law. Until that time, it will be difficult for us to do this. Because see, the kingpins of Galamsey, they are difficult to get. Because you never meet them on the field. They hire people that when you arrest them today, they hire different people tomorrow. So the main kingpins are hiding behind somewhere with their finances. And we are not targeting them. So if we can target the owners of the land and say, look, the law of the land is against illegal mining. So before you give your land to anybody to mine, you must make sure the person has all the necessary permits. If you don't do that, then you yourself must be prosecuted. I think that it will be one big arsenal that will help deter these people from giving out their land. See,
Okay, that for you as a Congolese must actually sound very familiar because there are a lot of similar issues in the DR Congo. What do you think when you heard that sentiment about the landowners?
It's quite common actually. When you talk about illegal gold mining operation, it's quite common. You see the same trend and pattern in terms of behavior, in terms of stakeholders, and in terms of reaction. You see that in the DRC, you see that in Mali, in Senegal, and we also see that in Ghana, where you always have a Chinese or a foreigners doing illegal gold mining with the blessing or the protection of one's landowner or one, in the case of DRC, one powerful political and local leadership there. So that's kind of explained to you the context where you see the same pattern happening. You see that in DRC, in Mali as well. So what he mentioned really strike a chord in me because it's exactly the same story that you find. When you go in DRC, you see they're going to tell you this traditional chief has allowed this to happen on his land and everything. And when he was making his comment, it was really interesting to note that when he said, when the landowner authorized someone to do illegal mining on his land, and you have the kind of element, the kind of conflict between the legal system, the legalistic legal system, and the traditional approach. If you have a traditional chief who believe that this is my land that are owned by right by so many years, so basically that traditional chief has the mindset of saying that this land belongs to me, and I'm the one who decide who's allowed to do what here. So in that regard, you kind of have that conflict between the mining rights and the land ownership right in many countries. You see that in Ghana, you see that in DRC, you see that in other countries. When he mentioned the fact that it's quite difficult to prosecute the landowners is because I do believe, I don't have the details about the Ghanaian law, but I do believe that there is a level of tension between the mining rights and the land ownership right that needs to be fixed, that needs to kind of determine who has much more power, who has much authority to determine what needs to be done on one specific land, especially when you have to deal with traditional chief who really traditionally have that story of saying it's our land, we decide what's happening here, and that's our decision to make. So those are the kind of tension that needs to be resolved to be able to address those issues, not only in Ghana, but elsewhere also in many African countries, especially when it comes to gold, because gold, it's quite easy to mine and it's easy operation to finance as well.
And you can see how the conversation moved very quickly away from Aisha Huang. People again started to look at Aisha Huang as a symptom, not the cause of the problem. She is
exactly.
a byproduct of the corruption of the landowners and also the chiefs, but also the people in power. And that came up as a very important theme as well in the conversation. And let me bring you now to FM 92.7 in Accra and their breakfast show. And again, they have very specific ideas as to who's responsible for this.
Mm-hmm.
Protect what is supposed to be for all of us. which is kept in trust by the President of the Republic, whose assigns have been found to be corporate in what's going on. How do we go about it?
It's a big security concern. There are parts of Ghana where Galamsey is going on, it's rife, and the forestry can't even go and combat it because they go there and they are met with people with guns and all types of weapons. At this point, I think Galamsey is rather fighting us. We are not fighting Galamsey.
And another important point I observe is that everything is vested in the president, the Lands Commission, Minerals Commission, and all the individuals who serve on those commissions largely are appointed by the president. And if you look at the scheme of things, a lot of the politicians are also involved in this illegal mining. So the politicians cannot fight against themselves. You know what I mean? Because if there's an issue and somebody has a license, it will come from Mineral Commission or Land Commission, whatever commission. And these are the politicians who get those licenses. So when they mess up the environment or they do the wrong thing, they go back to their own party people. And that's how we had issues like party in Sky and things. We're having that kind of conversation.
The gentleman in that party.
Okay. There
Exactly.
it is. They are going right after the politicians who are stuffing their pockets. The point that I also made in our discussion on the podcast, which if you want to go deep on this issue, I invite you to listen to the podcast that we did this week on it as well with Francis Xavier Tuoku, who is a leading Ghanaian environmentalist. And one of the things that we pointed out is that this is not just an issue in the mining sector. The greed and corruption from the people in power is also what goes to the root of the problem in illegal fishing in Ghana, also the illegal timber trade, exactly, and other mining as well. And again, I want to be very clear here, and I think, Geraud, you will agree with me, and it's the same in the Congo as it is in Ghana. When we talk about Chinese illegal mining in Ghana, a lot of the attention is on the Chinese, and they do generate a lot of attention. But when you look at the people who are being arrested, the vast majority of those arrested for illegal mining in Ghana are Nigerians, Beninese, from all over West Africa. So this is not uniquely a Chinese problem. However, there is one issue, though, and I'd like to get your take on this, Joel, is that what experts have been telling us is that the Chinese bring in the cash. And because they bring the cash, they're bringing in the heavy machinery, and they are oftentimes greasing the wheels of corruption. Particularly this question of the politicians that we heard on 92.7, and also this question of the chiefs and the landowners. So if the Chinese are bringing in cash, that is almost part of the problem as well, or a big part of the problem as well.
You say they're bringing the cash and the machinery. Me, I'm going to tell you, not only they bring the cash and the machinery, sometimes they're just working for a powerful politician. I'm going to give you a case where you see a politician who owns or either know a certain land in some part of Ghana or even the US in different countries, and he knows there is gold there. So what does he do? He goes to China. He buys equipment. When he buys equipment, generally, because those equipment are in Chinese, the Chinese are offering, they also sell you the service on how to use the equipment. And they say, okay, it's simple. You come with the equipment and come with the people. You are going to the gold mining in my land. And when you dig deep, you're gonna find out that many of those Chinese, most of the time, they do work with politicians, and they're just they're just partners of those politicians. That's why when you arrest them, they go scot-free. It's easy to let them go because someone powerful behind has been pushing, has been helping them. So you have that situation happening a lot. And because Chinese, they come with heavy machineries, they come with money, they come with equipment, that makes them much more visible. And because they also get much more when you compare them with the Ghanaians themselves, or people from Nigeria, or people from Benin. And that's kind of that's why they stick out among all those who are involved in the process. But what they say in the radio show it's really something that we need to address in Africa is the fact that many of those cases, you mentioned timber, you mentioned fish, you mentioned gold and other minerals, you have many politicians involved behind. They are, at the end, you kind of find yourself like how politicians are going to sue themselves in that operation. Themselves, they're the law. Themselves, they are the one leading the operations. At the end, they have no motive on acting. You're gonna get Aisha Huang in prison today. I can bet you today there is another Aisha Huang in power. There are so many Aisha Huang.
There's 10 of them that have already filled
10 of them that's already working below
That's right.
below the radar. So
because
if you
the
don't
root
address
problem
that,
hasn't been solved.
it's corruption, exactly.
Because
the root problem is
corruption drives
corruption.
it. I mean, corruption
Exactly.
drives it. And so,
Exactly.
and I've already been, since our show yesterday, I've gotten several emails from people, and people were saying, well, what do you want the Chinese to do? Okay. And all I'm going to say is, okay, first and foremost, I do want to make a very important distinction here. There is a difference between Chinese and China. That the Aisha Huangs of the world do not represent the Chinese government. They don't represent the Communist Party. They don't represent any of that. They are doing their own thing. They're independent actors. In fact, if you talk to folks in many Chinese embassies across Africa, they look at the Aisha Huangs as just a pain in the ass. And we saw this in the DRC. In South Kivu and North Kivu, the embassy has been saying, you guys have got to get out. You got to leave. And if you don't leave, you're on your own. But this is a headache, by the way, for the Chinese embassies in Africa as well. So there's no synergy between these people and the Chinese government. However, a couple different things here. The Chinese government writes every 3 years in a beautiful declaration at the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation that it vows to protect the blue economy in Africa, forestry, environment, all these different things. It has made a pledge to help protect and sustain African sustainability and environment. That's number one. So hold the Chinese to their promises of what they've actually already said. Number two, here in Southeast Asia, it's very interesting. There's political will from the Chinese to crack down on illegal crime when it affects them. So what we've been seeing here is joint operations between the Chinese government, the Public Security Bureau, and the Myanmar government, the Thai government, the Philippines government, the Vietnamese government, and the Cambodian Laotian governments, where they have been sending in People's Armed Police and PSB to literally grab Chinese suspects who are violating laws in telecom and cybercrime theft. So we have seen what it looks like when the Chinese actually have an incentive to crack down on crime in other countries. They work with the local government, they go in jointly, they share intelligence, and they bring these Chinese nationals out. That is a model for what they could do for the Aisha Huangs in Africa. What do you think?
Yeah, but as long as the Aisha Huangs in Africa are not involved in hurting any Chinese interest in the country, there we go.
It's a political will thing.
They have no motive of doing that.
Screw up the environment all they want, and then no one cares.
In last October, Global Witness released a report about a Chinese company that has been, exporting illegal timber from the DRC. And when they've been questioned, Chinese say, the crime has been committed in DRC, not in China. If the DRC authorities reach out to us asking us to take an action, we will. But when you know that behind that Chinese company in DRC, you have a powerful general behind, you do know that DRC will never ask China to do anything.
And we go back to the root of the problem again. Exactly. There is the root of the problem.
So the Chinese, they go scot-free. They say, you cannot pressure us. We understand it's a problem in your country. But if officials in your own countries are not feeling the urgent need to address the issue, they're themselves part of the problem. What do you want us to do?
There we go.
We can only recommend to our citizens, when you go to foreign countries, don't do something illegal. But when they come to in your country and they find protection, they find partnership with powerful people in your countries, and civil society is unhappy, you cannot come and blame us.
Listen, and they're not wrong. I mean, they're not wrong. So I kind of stand a little bit corrected that here in Southeast Asia, the local governments have said that the cybercrime issue is as much a problem for them as it is for the Chinese. So there's mutual aligned interest. It is just so tragic, though, that in too many African leaders do not see their own country's environment as being worthy of that kind of engagement. And so maybe that is the root problem is corruption.
No, Eric, when you know the amount of money that you can do in a gold operation like this in countries like Mali, DRC, Ghana, I can tell you, when you're a politician, you say, I'm going to get a Chinese, going to work 2 years for me in this illegal mining operation. After 2 years, I'm done. I can go away from politics. I made millions of dollars. So yeah, the incentive to really get illegal mining from Chinese, it's just so easy for any politicians in Africa.
Okay, so let's move on to our second topic now. And we're going to first take you down memory lane into the Wayback Machine, back to these heady times of December 2022. Let me refresh you about the United States Africa Leaders Summit. And here is a great little video, if I can get it to play. Oh, still learning how to do these live shows.
In a
Here we
keynote
go.
address
Okay.
at the 3-day U.S. Africa Leaders Summit, President Biden told the crowd the United States is, quote, all in on Africa's future, pitching the
Remember
U.S.
that.
as a reliable partner to promote democratic elections and push critical health and energy growth. Biden told the crowd that Monday's announcement of $55 billion in investments over the next 3 years was, quote, just the beginning, promising more than $15 billion in private trade and investment commitments, as well as partnerships.
Okay, there you go. $55 billion. Biden was all in.
US is all in Africa. Remember, I did a show on that. The US is back in Africa. I was like, okay, we'll
We're
see.
back. Okay, so now the year started out really, really well. I mean, there was a flurry of high-profile guests that went. Visitors from Janet Yellen to Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, to Kamala Harris. I mean, just one high-profile visit.
Jill Biden.
Joe Biden went. But remember that, that $55 billion, the problem with it was that it's kind of not a real number. And so it's it's still a very big number. And we have to give the United States credit. That is $55 billion over 3 years, okay, that is committed for Africa. But most of that money, the vast majority of that money was already pledged. So it was recycled money. Now, the Americans will say, listen, everybody recycles their money when they make these big announcements.
Chinese does that a lot.
Absolutely true.
Yeah.
The problem is when you play games like this and you put numbers out like $55 billion, okay, and then a year later people say, well, wait a minute, what happened?
We haven't seen that. Yeah.
We haven't seen anything. I still see the same US AID programs. I still see the same, embassy programs and the military assistance and whatever, but I don't feel like there's anything new. So that's problem number one. Problem number two was that Joe Biden, he said that he was going to go visit Africa in the next year, in 2023. And right now, I'm looking at my calendar. It's December 8th as we see it. So basically, we've got about 2 weeks until Christmas.
Maybe he can make it for Christmas. You never know. Maybe he's going to spend New Year's in Africa. You never know.
I don't think so. I don't think so. And so then what I did is I wrote an article today, for our weekly newsletter there, saying if the U.S. really wants to compete with China and Africa, it's going to have to stop making these promises that it's not fulfilling. And he's not going to make it to Africa this year. In fact, he told the Angolan president last week or about 10 days ago that he's going to try. But let's be honest, Geraud, with 2 wars going on, the Christmas holiday coming, and a re-election campaign that is just starting to ramp up, Africa is not exactly the top of his priority list.
Nah, Africa is really somewhere in the bottom, somewhere there, just not really in the top of priority of anybody in Washington. Right now, in Washington, staffers in the State Department, in the Congress, in the White House, anyone, I think anyways in that mindset of like, let's keep Africa, let's keep the mess away from Africa. So we're gonna find solutions that just like, not put any fuss and mess in the country. So because literally no one has the bandwidth in DC to sit down and to really focus and to do something about what's happening in Africa. So yeah, I think that many African leaders have understood that. They're like, okay, I think that there's no really time for us right now to what's happening. We're gonna have to find our own way to maneuver around this in this context here.
I know that a lot of the folks inside the National Security Council at the State Department have been really trying to get the administration to focus more attention on it. I spoke with a staffer on Capitol Hill a couple of weeks ago, and he just kind of laughed at me. He said, Eric, there is no bandwidth whatsoever for Africa right now. He says, we are focused on Russia and the Russia-Ukraine war, and now Israel and the Gaza war. That's it. Exactly. That's all they can handle. And then to some extent, a little bit what's going on in the South China Sea with the Philippines. But if you're not in those top 3, you don't get any kind of attention. Now, I also want to take you into the Wayback Machine. And this is an interesting one as well. This is a memorandum of understanding between the Democratic Republic of Congo, your home country, the Republic of Zambia, and the United States government. Tell everybody about this MOU that they're looking at right now.
Woof, that MOU basically came in December last year during the US Africa Summit. It came few months after DRC and Zambia signed another MOU where they say they're going to develop a EV battery value chain locally. So the US kind of piggybacked on the project in December. They say, okay, we're going to be all in. We are going to be accompanying the project. We're going to invest in. We're going to, do the feasibility study and recreate a condition how it's going to come to happen. This MOU happened in a context where the US is really trying to find its own way to develop its own supply chain of critical minerals outside of China, to reduce its dependence on China in that part of the supply chain. So they count on DRC and Zambia to build that supply chain. So they signed that MOU in December last year. But since last year till today, we are still at the MOU stage. The MOU didn't go from MOU to actual agreement to actual contract. So it's just from the news that we do have from different parties on the ground, it's still discussion.
And that's not the U.S. fault, by the way. That's not necessarily. I mean, listen, dealing with the Zambians and the Congolese, as you know, can be difficult sometimes. And it can be bureaucratic. It can be very slow. And so, but maybe part of the problem, Geraud, is that the U.S. ideas sometimes come in too complicated. A 3-country deal, a big EV battery supply chain. This is a little bit like the port of Lobito and the Lobito Corridor project. It's a massive project, a little bit like the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, the IMEC corridor, huge cross-continental. I mean, give us credit for thinking big and dreaming big and wanting to do big things.
Can't blame them.
You can't blame them, but the problem is that the execution is very
it's more complex. It's very complex because when you see a three-party memorandum, you have to understand that the DRC has to make up his own mind about what he wants to do with this EV value chain, and Zambia needs to make its own mind as well. And the both of them needs to come together to understand how are we going to divide the revenue coming from that. Who's going to get what? Who's going to create more? Who's going to create more job? Which part is going to get the bulk of the project? And I remember in August they had that pre-feasibility study that was supposed to be done by the Africa Development Bank, who signed an agreement with the U.S. Exim Bank as well to finance a pre-feasibility study, but it was supposed to be done in August. And up till now, that pre-feasibility study hasn't been released, hasn't been done yet. So we're still in that space where they're discussing. My guess is that those two countries, I'm going to put the US aside, but those two countries, DRC and Zambia, they have their own political situation on the ground. They cannot manage it so far. DRC is in the midst of election right now. You can forget everything about anything. There. Yeah, it's election time in Congo, so forget about that. So yeah.
And this was the point that I brought up in my column, which is that African governments, though, while the DRC is preoccupied with its own election, Hakainde Hichilema and a number of other governments, including that in Zimbabwe, they're not standing still, sitting by the phone, waiting for the Americans to call. I can't
to deal with this debt issue. Can you imagine when you think of that, comparing to creating a EV battery with DRC is not really the top of its priority right now.
Yeah, so here is a $2.8 billion deal in Zimbabwe. Let me just quickly pull up what's going on in Nigeria. Okay, so here's a $250 million deal in Nigeria that the Chinese have done for lithium. And also there's been deals in Morocco. All of these are moving upstream in the value chain. So there's some processing that's happening here. And so the challenge here for the Americans is that while they're making these big promises, $55 billion, Biden's going to go, we're going to do, battery kind of EV supply chain kind of things, and never follow through, people just get kind of like, oh, for F's sakes. I mean, really, again, stop with the promises and start with the execution. This is the problem that the Americans are facing. And what's interesting, Geraud, I find this so compelling, is that there is so much goodwill for the Americans still.
Yeah.
So much. People really want us to succeed. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, they're like, come on, you can do it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
But they just aren't doing it. you know, and this is where the Chinese come into the picture, because they are very good at that rapid, quick execution. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And that, I think, that's one of the key advantages of the Chinese.
Yes, as much as we often say that the African don't get the Chinese, they don't get the Americans, how it works. I think it's also the same from the American perspective. They don't really get how things are done in Africa, and what the priorities of African leaders, and how to engage with African leaders. When you come and promise so much money, and you find yourself stuck in a very complex bureaucracy, and where you have multi-stakeholder participation, where they have to give their input before deciding what's to be done, compared to a country that comes and say, you know, I'm gonna give 10 billion, and the next year you see 10 billions coming. I'm gonna build a processing plant here. You see the processing plant arriving. Of course, you're gonna be lagging behind. But as you say, there is a goodwill for America in Africa, because Afrobarometer released few months back already a survey about how Africans are still seeing positively the US, and they'd like to see much more US implication. But it also tells you something, because you mentioned about Africa, how Africa see things. I kind of wonder, do African leaders see the US as an economic partner, or much more a political partner? When it comes to
security
politics,
partner, I think there's a lot of security. I mean, a lot comes down to security.
But there are more security and politics than economically.
No, but I mean, economically, I mean, the U.S. really doesn't do that much trade with that.
Exactly.
But it is a big investor. The United States far exceeds the Chinese in investment. In fact, Chinese investment has plummeted in Africa, and it's now like 4th or 5th. And so, you know.
Yeah, they're kind of behind. No, it's okay. They're kind of behind, but the idea here is the perception that many African countries do have about that. They still have that perception that China is more an economic partner. When I need money, when you need financing, we know we're gonna go to China. But when we need political support, security support in the United Nations Security Council, or anywhere else, we can still see the US. But when it comes to economic and development, I think China is much more the one they're looking at, and that, I think that's where I kind of wonder if at the end those two will be able to compete in Africa, since they provide two different of needs of African countries.
Okay, so I brought up earlier this example, and I want to talk about it. And this is this example of the oh, hold on, I got to share this very quickly. I had it up earlier on the screen, but this example of in Kenya, and this is really in many ways highlights the problem of the U.S. approach that you were talking about, that the U.S. doesn't really understand how to do business. So this was during the Trump administration, and this was, again, part of this effort to compete with the Chinese in building infrastructure in Africa. And so the U.S. wanted to make sure that U.S. firms were in the competition to bid for the Mombasa to Nairobi expressway, this highway, okay? And they don't like the way that the Chinese do it, where the Chinese will oftentimes have closed bids. They'll oftentimes get no bids, as we saw with the China Road and Bridge Corporation and the Standard Gauge Railway. And so they wanted an open process. And so Kyle McCarter, who's the former U.S. ambassador to Kenya, he early on touted, we're not going to do it the way the Chinese do it. We're going to bring in all of these stakeholders, and what we're going to do is make it an inclusive, open, transparent process. Well, guess what happened? Everybody wanted a little piece of the money into their pockets. Okay. Yeah. And the cost just inflated to the point where they couldn't do it anymore. So Bechtel pulled out. And I think that's a little bit of the problem of what's going on in the DRC Zambia deal, is that by making it so inclusive and by opening it up to all these different groups and by making it more open and transparent, noble intentions as it is, again, noble intentions, the right thing to do, okay? The problem is, though, is that the operating system of the U.S. inclusivity and the operating system of Zambian and Congolese deal-making don't go together.
Exactly. And they don't match.
And what ends up happening is we get what happened in Mombasa and Nairobi with that, you know, and that is, I think, just those operating systems are not the same. It's like, you know, Android and iOS trying to talk to each other. And so, you know, so I gave, you know, the US a little bit of crap, which is kind of funny because, you know, Geraud, you and I joke I get accused of being anti-China all the time.
All the time.
I mean, all the time. And funny that, on the CGSP team, I'm the only one who's singled out. So
Exactly.
kind of like, and I don't even say it worse than some of the others on the team, but yet I get all the attention. And then I write a column like this, and nobody comes back and says, like, oh, okay, maybe, So, I mean, I don't give a crap because I'm not pro-China, pro-US, pro-anybody, but I just think it's ironic that for all of those of you in the comment section that think I'm anti-China, take a look at today's column and you'll see, a very different point that actually, so let's now just wrap up very quickly with, Kenya trying to get some cash. Okay, so this was a very interesting story that came out earlier this week, and it was one where I had to really just look very, very hard at what the story was. Okay, now, let me give you a little bit of backup. Prior to the Belt and Road Forum a couple of weeks ago, that William Ruto went, William Ruto's deputy president got on Kenyan radio and said, we're going to ask China for $1 billion, of a loan in loans, new loans, in order to fix roads in Kenya, because that was a huge problem. They've got a number of half-finished roads, which are very dangerous. People are dying. They're falling apart in the rains. It's really a very dangerous situation. So, and we all kind of looked at each other and said, wait, according to Boston University's Global Development Policy Center, in 2022, which is the last year that we have data, China lent Africa a combined $922 million.
Yeah.
Okay. Why would the Chinese then turn around to lend $1 billion for road construction, which doesn't generate any revenue, to a country that is already in debt distress? Okay. That logic didn't make sense.
Doesn't much. Yeah.
Turns out Ruto said, no, we weren't going to do that. We were not going to ask them. That was I don't know if he said fake news, but he kind of insinuated it, even though his deputy president was on the radio saying this thing.
Yeah.
Now we got a situation, where the central bank governor is saying, we're going to go ask China. We're in talks with China, it says, for $1 billion loan in order to help pay off a $2 billion euro bond debt that's going to be due next year. Okay. Yeah. Geraud, you and I looked at each other and went like, something about this doesn't feel right.
Exactly. Yeah.
What was your reaction?
My reaction was like, wait, I remember you sent me the link. I was like, nah, that story doesn't make sense. And I went through the story like, nah. And I went starting to check on every Chinese news, that I know, that we follow, that we really follow closely, to kind of have what the Chinese had to say about that. And China, no one in China had to say about anything about that. I was like, this is, I don't want to call it fake news, but I want to call it a much more political news than anything else, where the Kenyans are saying that they're saying
let's not go down the fake news route. It's just crappy reporting by Reuters.
Yes, yeah. I'd say fake news from the central. I don't say from the central bank, but I'd say crappy news from the central bank, in the way that the Chinese are not reporting about that. This is what we mentioned few days or few weeks back, when we said, when it comes to China, Africa reporting, many politicians just have like that luxury of saying things about what China is going to do, what they're discussing with China, what they're talking with China, without China respond. Since China is not responding on that, they can just go scot-free, making promises and say, we're going to get $1 billion and everything. I was like, when I read it, I was like, no, there's no China story. There's no China side in this story. So I'm like, we should be really careful into believing that things really happening the way the Kenyans are presenting it.
You're absolutely right. Be very, very careful of this kind of story. So first and foremost, it only spoke with Kenyan sources, in this case, the central bank governor. And he said they said the National Treasury is engaged with the Chinese government. Okay. Now, Geraud, if I went to the Chinese and said, I want to buy pink unicorns, okay, I can technically say that I am engaged with the Chinese government.
Yeah.
There is no indication, as you have rightly pointed out, that the Chinese government has any inclination to give the Kenyans $1 billion to pay off this loan. Number one,
remember, Nigeria did that before.
Well, Nigeria, exactly. We'll get to the Nigeria question in a second. But here's why this reporter, and let me just see who it is. I didn't recognize him. Duncan Meary. Oh, actually, Duncan's a pretty solid reporter most of the time. But this one he whiffed it on. He totally whiffed it. Because what he didn't do was call up somebody like Brad Parks at Aid Data, Geronima at the China Global South Project, I don't know, Deborah Browdergim, Oscar Otele at the University of Nairobi. I mean, there are any number of people who he could have called up and said, what kind of reefer do you think the Kenyan central bank governor is smoking, or is it an edible? Because at the end of the day, this doesn't make any sense. Number one, here's what those experts would probably tell you. The Chinese don't usually give free flow cash loans, okay, just to pay off other debts. Most of the loans, almost all of the loans usually that they give to countries like Kenya are for infrastructure projects. If there is a free flow cash, it's oftentimes in the form of a credit swap or an emergency finance loan with a very particular purpose. That is not what the Kenyans are negotiating. And the reason why, think about it, if you're the China Exim Bank desk officer for Kenya and you get this request from the central bank governor, they say, Geraud, I'd like to borrow $1 billion of your dollars. And you say, well, what for? You say, well, I've got this other debt that I got to pay. So the $1 billion that you're going to borrow from us is not going to generate your economy any new money.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to repay it any sooner or, on time, any faster than the debt distress you've already been complaining about, because your president was just in Beijing asking my president to ease up on the debt repayments.
Which I declined, by the way.
Which you declined. Yeah. And so if you can't pay your existing debts to us, or struggling to and would like some relief, why should I give you another $1 billion? It just doesn't make any sense.
Exactly.
Okay. So be very, very cautious of these kinds of stories that you see that have no balance in them. And what was missing from this story is some kind of expert view that says, does this make sense?
Exactly.
And it doesn't make sense. Now, let me put a little disclaimer, just in case. We don't have the crystal ball inside the Chinese government. We have no idea. They sometimes do, random things.
Yeah.
It's possible maybe that the Kenyans are going to get $1 billion. I highly doubt it, but anything's possible.
Yeah.
But I highly doubt it. And I think this again speaks a little bit to the shortcomings of China, Kenya, China, Africa reporting that we see, that reporters, even for the mighty Reuters, are not, doing enough due diligence to be able to question some of these stories.
Exactly. That's what one of the things that I mentioned in South Africa a few weeks back, when I was saying, because of that lack of deep reporting about China, covering those China issues, with some medias and civil society find themselves more often in a position where they are unable to challenge narrative coming from public officials. Public officials will say something, you just don't know what rebuttal you can propose, put on the table to kind of question how solid is the information or the argument is putting out there. So because you really don't follow it yourself, that's where for me it's kind of it's kind of something that we need to improve a lot on African news media in Africa, coverage about China. There is that deep need of really understanding how China works and how Chinese institutions interact with the African institution in that context. I would really wish to see some attempt or Chinese side of that story to see what they say, what they're really saying. Because as I was saying earlier, Nigeria did that before. You remember it was 2-3 years back when Nigeria, for 2 years, has been saying China is going to fund, I don't know what, it was new railway. They're going to put billions in the bill. They spent 2 years they keep on saying that, but nothing never came up. So yeah, I think that's the need of really kind of having a better understanding and coverage of China in Africa.
Okay, I think that is a perfect segue to, if that's something you're interested in, then the best thing you can do is to subscribe to the China Global South Project. I mean, the work that Geraud is doing, the work that Cobus, as you guys, many of you know, we've got Antonia in Jakarta and Johnny in Jerusalem. We've got this great team putting together all of this amazing content every day, and it's just fantastic. And so we have these plans. It's not expensive. And by the way, I know you're going to have to pay for the good quality information. I mean, just relying on the internet, for free news on Twitter is really not going to do it anymore. And by the way, You know, my mother, she subscribes to the New York Times, and we do too. She gets the print edition of the New York Times. How much do you think a subscription to the print edition of the New York Times costs in the United States?
No
Take a
clue.
guess. Take a guess.
Let's say $35.
No, annual.
Annual, let's say, let me just go on a limb here. I'd say $200.
She pays $700 a year.
What?
That's what it costs. So we are significantly cheaper than $700
we
a year.
are way cheaper.
You
We are
know,
way
and
cheaper.
so now the key is that if you are a student or a teacher, just email me, Eric at ChinaAfricaProject.com or ChinaGlobalSouth.com, and I'll give you a link for a half off discount. But this is it's just, I'm so proud of the work that we do every day. And we've got, just to give a quick little shout out, Geraud is going to be updating his Congolese cobalt data set in January and February. We're building a new China-Africa data set on energy. We've got a beautiful documentary coming out about the Chinese mining of quartz in Indonesia, and we are mapping the entire Indonesian nickel sector.
Yeah.
So those are some of the cool things that we have coming up. And then, of course, we've got our EV battery metal newsletter coming out. We have a new Southeast Asia newsletter coming out. And Geraud and I are going to be doing a lot more video together just for our subscribers on the site. So it's really a fantastic deal. And I just hope that more people support the journalism that we're doing. But let's also just give a credit to the great work you're doing in French. If people want to follow Projet Afrique Chine, tell them where they can find you.
Oh, yes. If you want to follow what China is doing in Africa in French, you can visit projetafriquechine.com et vous aurez toutes les informations, switch in French, vous aurez toutes les informations concernant la Chine en Afrique, ce qui se passe. Nous le couvrons en français, nous couvrons différents sujets de la section anglaise, même de la section francophone.
We need subtitles now for everybody.
Yes, that's I'm speaking for those French who are speaking French. But if you're really interested in what we do in French, just visit our website in French. You're going to find so many great content. We have twice a week newsletter coming out every Tuesday and every Friday. Just on the top there, you're gonna see your week where you can input your email address to keep receiving email address. The newsletter, it's free. So far for us, it's free. So you never know. In the coming years, when we're going to grow much bigger, we're also going to become paid services. But for now, come and enjoy the free service that we're providing. And we really have also great content, podcast and everything. But I'm going to be also becoming much more present on the English section with different videos we're going to make there. And I'm going to be resuming my weekly videos of China-Africa conversation. And yes, if you have anything, if you have any comment, feedback, you can reach out to me on the email address. And if you know anybody who wants to be a guest on the podcast that we do have, Afrique Chine, in French, he can speak French or she can speak French, just send them over. I'm going to be happy to talk with them. Next week, we're going to have another show. We're going to talk in Afrique Chine podcast. We're going to talk about a movie, It's Bitter. We talked about it on the English website, on the Afrique Project China Africa podcast. Now we have it in Afrique Chine. It's a very interesting podcast that talks about a documentary that covers the human side of China Africa engagement. I'm gonna really advise you, if you have the time, to go on the website Eat Bitter to watch that movie. It's very interesting.
And by the way, the movie Eat Bitter, who Geraud interviewed one of the directors and I interviewed one of the directors, is now in the next stage for Oscar contention. And can you imagine? This is two young women, one from China, one from the Central African Republic. Directed this first-time director, did this movie and up for potential Oscar contention. So they moved up into this pool where they're going to be pulled from potentially to be selected for an Oscar. So I don't quite understand how it works, but it's very exciting. But it really gives you a kind of a sense of the kind of work that we're doing. Nobody else is doing this. We would appreciate your support. But if this is just the show you want to watch, we'll be back again next week with another edition of the CGSP Roundtable. So Geraud, thank you again for always a fun way to end the week. And always a lively conversation. This is, by the way, just so you guys know, we do this show, but like all week, this is what our conversations sound like. So this is actually not an act. This is just the way it actually is all week. So But
One
thanks
day,
so much,
one day
Mo.
we're gonna be releasing our phone call conversation just to
I know,
see.
we really should.
It's
We
just
really
the
should.
same conversation that we do have. So yeah,
It's exactly the same. We just sit there and
Yeah.
go, Baba. And that's why we said we should record this and actually do something with it. So
Exactly.
here we are doing something.
that's all.
with
The,
it.
the
So
idea came up for those videos. So yeah,
that's the way it is. So okay, everybody, have a great weekend. We'll be back
Yeah.
again next week. Looking forward to all of your comments below. And again, like and subscribe if you'd like to continue receiving our show. Okay, talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.
bye bye.